The chamber was silent except for the soft clicking sounds that came from the Velari ambassador's breathing apparatus. Ambassador Telris stood in the center of the Grand Galactic Council Hall, her blue skin growing paler with each passing moment. Around her, representatives from hundreds of worlds sat in their designated seats watching but saying nothing. Telris had been speaking for nearly an hour. Her voice, translated through the neural implant all diplomats wore, carried the weight of desperation that no technology could hide. She was begging for her people's lives. "Please," she said again, her webbed hands clasped together in a gesture that crossed all species barriers. "The Kravith swarm has already consumed our outer colonies. 3 billion souls remain on Velros. Prime, our military cannot stop them. Our shields will fail in 6 months. We need help." The holographic display behind her showed the horror in stark detail. Dark organic ships surrounded her homeworld like insects around dying prey. Each Kravith vessel was enormous, grown rather than built, pulsing with hostile life. They moved with purpose, slowly drawing closer to the blue-green world that had been home to the Velari for 10,000 years. High Counselor Vexthor of the Luxari hegemony was the first to speak. His crystalline body refracted the chamber's light into rainbow patterns as he shifted in his seat. His voice was cold, precise, and final. "Ambassador Telris, the Council sympathizes with your situation. However, the Velros system lies outside the protected zone. The treaty signed 400 years ago clearly established the boundaries of our defensive obligations. That treaty was signed before the Kraveth evolved into what they are now," Telris pleaded. "Before they became a swarm that consumes everything. The rules have changed." "The rules," Vexthor continued, "are what maintain order in the galaxy. If we abandon our treaties for emotional reasons, chaos follows." Another counselor rose. This one was Threnosian, an ancient species that looked like flowing liquid metal given shape and consciousness. Counselor Jen's voice was gentle but no, less devastating. "We must also consider the cost. A military intervention against the Kravith swarm would require a combined fleet of at least 2,000 ships. The economic impact would be severe. Food prices across 17 sectors would increase. Trade routes would be disrupted. Is it responsible to risk the stability of billions to save 3 billion? Telris felt something break inside her. They were talking about her people like numbers in an equation. Like the lives of children, artists, teachers, and farmers could be weighed against the price of grain. "We are not asking for charity," she said, her voice cracking. "Velros Prime has rare mineral deposits. Our people are skilled engineers. We can repay—" "The issue is not payment," interrupted Counselor Drex of the Xanthir Collective. The insectoid being clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "The issue is precedent. If we intervene every time a species faces extinction, where does it end? The galaxy is vast. Suffering is common. We cannot save everyone." "Then what is the purpose of this council?" Telris shouted, her composure finally shattering. "What is the purpose of your mighty fleets, your advanced technology, your ancient wisdom, if not to help those who cannot help themselves?" The chamber fell silent. Several counselors looked uncomfortable. Others showed no emotion at all. Vexthor stood, his crystalline form catching the light. "This council maintains peace and order across 300,000 inhabited systems. We do this through careful management, strategic planning, and yes, difficult choices. We understand your pain, Ambassador Telris, but the answer is no. The Council will not intervene in the Velros situation." Telris swayed on her feet. Her breathing apparatus clicked faster, struggling to provide oxygen as her body went into shock. Around the chamber, counselors were already standing, preparing to move to the next item on their agenda. To them, this was finished. A regrettable situation, but finished. Security personnel approached Telris gently. One of them, a Ythrani with kind eyes, took her arm to steady her. "Come, Ambassador. Let me escort you out." As they led her from the chamber, Telris looked back one last time. The massive view screen that dominated the hall had already changed. Her world, her dying world, was replaced by trade statistics and shipping routes. The Council was moving on. In the observation gallery high above the chamber floor, a human woman sat alone. She wore the simple gray uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, with the blue and white flag of United Earth on her shoulder. Her name was Lieutenant Commander Jessica Torres, and she was one of only 3 human observers assigned to the Galactic Council. Humanity was new to galactic politics. 50 years ago, the Luxari had made first contact with Earth. 50 years was nothing in galactic time. Most of the ancient species barely remembered that humans existed. They were newcomers, primitives, barely worth acknowledging. Torres had watched the entire hearing. She had seen the Vehlari ambassador's hope turn to desperation, turn to despair. She had watched as the most powerful beings in the galaxy chose to do nothing. Her hand trembled as she activated her communication device. The quantum link connected instantly to Earth, 23 light-years away. "This is Torres," she said, quietly. "I'm uploading a full recording of today's council session. The Vehlari situation. Ma'am, they said no. The council is letting 3 billion people die." There was a pause. Then a voice responded, crisp and clear despite the vast distance. "Admiral Chen Mei Lin, Commander of UN Galactic Affairs Command." "Received. Torres, I'm watching it now." Another pause. "Stand by, I'm making some calls." Torres ended the connection and looked down at the council chamber below. They were already deep into their next discussion, something about mining rights in a disputed asteroid belt. The Vehlari were forgotten, but humans had long memories, and humanity had a habit of doing things the galaxy considered impossible, foolish or both. Torres smiled slightly. The galaxy was about to learn something new about the strange species from Earth. When someone screams for help, humans don't check treaties first. They answer. The emergency meeting of the UN Security Council took place 36 hours after Lieutenant Commander Torres sent her report. In a conference room buried deep beneath Geneva, representatives from every major Earth government gathered around a curved table. The holographic display in the center showed the Vehlros system in painful detail. Admiral Chen Mei Lin stood at the head of the table. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but her presence filled the room. She had fought in the Titan Rebellion 15 years ago, when human colonists on Saturn's moon had declared independence. She knew what it meant to make hard choices under pressure. "Let me be clear about what we're discussing," Chen said, her voice calm but firm. 3 billion sentient beings are going to die in 6 months. The Galactic Council has refused to help. We are debating whether Earth should intervene. Ambassador James Okafor from the African Union spoke first. "Admiral, I understand the humanitarian impulse. God knows I do. But we're talking about deploying our fleet across half the galaxy. We've only been part of the galactic community for 50 years. This could destroy everything we've built. Or it could define who we are," replied Minister Li Wei from the Pan-Asian Coalition. "What message does it send if we gain the power to help and then choose not to use it?" The Russian representative, Colonel Natasha Volkov, leaned forward. "The practical concerns are significant. Our ships are designed for system defense, not interstellar warfare. The Kravith swarm destroyed an entire Vehlari battle group in 4 hours. What makes us think we can do better?" "Because we fight differently," Chen said. She pressed a button and the display changed to show various human military engagements. "The Luxari fight in formation. The Threnosians use overwhelming force. The Xanthir rely on numerical superiority. We adapt. We improvise. We find ways to win that the enemy doesn't expect." "That's a nice theory, Admiral," said the European Federation's Prime Minister Kowalski. "But this isn't a simulation. You're asking us to risk thousands of lives on a theory." Chen nodded slowly. "You're right. It is a risk. But let me ask you all something. Why did we reach for the stars? Why did we spend centuries developing faster than light travel? Why did we work so hard to join the galactic community?" She let the question hang in the air for a moment. "We did it because we believed that out here, among the stars, we could be better than we were on Earth. We could learn from our mistakes. All those times in our history when good people did nothing while others suffered. Rwanda, Syria, the Pacific Wars. We said never again so many times it became meaningless. Chen's voice grew harder. The Galactic Council just told 3 billion people that their lives don't matter enough to risk profit margins and shipping schedules. If we stay silent, if we do nothing, then we're just as guilty as they are. We become everything we promised ourselves we wouldn't be. The room fell silent. Chen could see the internal struggle on every face around the table. These were good people facing an impossible choice. Finally, Secretary General Maria Santos of the United Earth Government spoke. She was an old woman, her hair white, her face lined with the weight of decades of service. She had survived the climate wars as a child. She understood suffering. Admiral Chen, Santos said quietly, if we authorize this operation, can we win? Chen met her eyes. I don't know. Honestly, I don't. But I know we can try. And I know that trying is better than letting 3 billion people die without raising a hand to help them. Santos looked around the table, reading the faces of her colleagues. Then she nodded. I call for a vote. All in favor of authorizing Operation Lifeline? One by one hands rose. Not all of them. There were dissenters, as there should be in any democracy, but the majority was clear. The motion passes, Santos said. Admiral Chen, you are authorized to deploy the Third Fleet to the Velros system. Bring as many of them home as you can. Within 6 hours, the orders went out across the solar system. The Third Fleet, humanity's largest military force, began preparing for deployment. 47 warships, from massive carriers to nimble destroyers, began loading supplies and personnel. But it wasn't just the military that responded. When word spread that Earth was mounting a rescue mission, volunteers came forward by the thousands. Doctors, engineers, teachers, programmers, farmers, people from every profession who wanted to help. Captain Sarah Okonkwo, a veteran of Earth's Special Forces, was in her apartment in Lagos when she received the deployment order. She was supposed to be on leave, recovering from her last mission. Instead, she found herself packing a bag and heading to the spaceport. On the transport to orbit, she sat next to a young man who couldn't have been more than 25. He wore civilian clothes and clutched a datapad nervously. First deployment? She asked. He nodded. I'm a structural engineer. Volunteered to help rebuild whatever the swarm damages. My parents think I'm crazy. Are you? He smiled slightly. Probably. But I watched that Velari ambassador's plea. I kept thinking, what if that was Earth? What if that was my family? Someone has to help. Okonkwo felt a surge of pride. This was what made humanity special, she thought. Not their weapons or their tactics, but their stubborn refusal to accept that some problems were too big or not our concern. The Third Fleet assembled in orbit around Mars. Admiral Kofi Mensah, a tall man with gray at his temples and eyes that had seen too much war, stood on the bridge of the flagship Indomitable. He watched as ship after ship reported ready for departure. His second-in-command, Commander Rodriguez, approached. All ships report ready, sir. We can jump in 10 minutes. Mensah nodded. Before they left, he opened a channel to all ships in Dao. The fleet. This is Admiral Mensah. In 10 minutes, we jump to the Velros system. What we're about to do, the galaxy says, is impossible. They say we're too weak, too inexperienced, too foolish to make a difference. Maybe they're right, but maybe they've forgotten what it means to care more about doing what's right than doing what's safe. He paused, looking at the faces of his crew. The Velari sent a call for help into the darkness. Everyone else ignored it. But we heard them, and we're going to answer. All ships, prepare for jump. Let's go save some lives. The Third Fleet vanished into hyperspace, racing toward a war zone half a galaxy away. Behind them, Earth watched and waited. Ahead of them, 3 billion Velari prayed for a miracle. Humanity was coming. Whether that would be enough remained to be seen. The Third Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Velros system, and immediately every sensor screen lit up with warnings. What they saw made even the most experienced officers pause. The Kravith swarm was worse than the intelligence, reports had suggested. Hundreds of bioships filled the space around Velros Prime, each one a nightmare of organic technology. They looked like something that had been grown in a fever dream, all pulsing flesh and chitinous armor plates. The smallest was the size of an Earth cruiser. The largest dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Mensa stood perfectly still as he absorbed the tactical display. His operations officer, Commander Rodriguez, looked pale. "Sir, we're reading over 400 distinct Kraveth vessels. Mass estimates suggest their total fleet tonnage is 15 times ours." "Noted," Mensa said calmly. He had expected this. The galaxy's elder races didn't run from fights they thought they could win. If the Luxari and Thranosians had refused to engage the swarm, it meant the odds were terrible. Good thing humans had a history of ignoring the odds. "Launch reconnaissance drones," Mensa ordered. "I want detailed scans of their formation, movement patterns, and communication methods. And send a message to Vailros Prime. Let them know we're here." Down on the planet's surface, in the capital, city of Thalvaros, Ambassador Telris had returned home expecting to die with her people. The Council's refusal had been the final verdict. There was no hope left. She was in her dwelling, sitting by the window and watching her world's twin moons rise over the ocean when the communication came through. At first she thought it was a mistake, but then she heard the words, translated into her language by alien technology she didn't recognize. "Vailros Prime, this is Admiral Kofi Mensa of the United Earth Third Fleet. We received your distress call. We're here to help. Please respond." Telris dropped the cup she was holding. It shattered on the floor, but she didn't notice. Her hands shook as she activated her communicator and contacted the Planetary Defense Center. "This is Ambassador Telris. Please tell me I'm not hallucinating. Please tell me there's actually a fleet here." The defense coordinator's voice came back thick with emotion. "It's real, Ambassador. 47 ships. They're flying a blue flag with a white and green planet on it. They say they're from Earth. Earth. The newcomers. The primitives that the elder races barely acknowledged. They had come." Telris began to cry. For the first time in months, they were tears of hope. In orbit, Admiral Mensa was receiving the reconnaissance data and liking none of it. The Kraveth weren't just sitting around Vailros Prime. They were actively converting the system's outer moons into more bioships. They were reproducing, growing stronger every day. Captain Sarah Okonkwo entered the bridge. She commanded the stealth corvette Ghost, one of 12 special operations ships in the fleet. She studied the tactical display with a professional eye. "There, organized," she observed. "That central cluster, the really big ones. I'd bet my pension that's their command structure." Mensa nodded. "Our analysts think the same thing. The Kraveth are a hive mind. Cut off the head, the body dies." "Or goes crazy and thrashes around," Rodriguez added nervously. "I'll take crazy and thrashing over organized and methodical," Mensa said. He turned to Okonkwo. "Captain, how close? Can you get your stealth ships to that command cluster?" Okonkwo smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Close enough to make them regret being born. The plan came together over the next 12 hours. It was insane, which made it perfectly human. The main fleet would engage the swarm directly, drawing their attention and forces. Meanwhile, Okonkwo's stealth team would slip through the chaos and strike at the command ships. The problem was that engaging the swarm meant fighting a force 15 times larger than their own. People were going to die. A lot of people. Mensa addressed the fleet one more time before the battle began. "I won't lie to you. This is going to be the hardest fight any of us have ever faced. Some of us won't make it home. But we didn't come here expecting easy. We came here because 3 billion people needed help and everyone else said no." He paused, looking at the faces on his screen. Thousands of men and women who had volunteered for this mission. "The galaxy thinks we're crazy. Maybe we are. But I'd rather be crazy and humane than sane and cruel. All ships, battle stations. Let's show the swarm what happens when you threaten innocent people and humanity finds out about it." The Third Fleet moved into attack formation and accelerated toward the swarm. The Kraveth responded immediately, their bioships turning to face the new threat. What followed was 3 days of the most brutal combat humanity had ever experienced. Human. Ships were smaller and faster than the Kravith vessels, but the bioships had advantages too. They could repair damage by growing new tissue. They could adapt their weapons to counter human shields, and there were so many of them. The destroyer, Valiant, took a direct hit in the first hour of fighting. Her captain, refusing to let his damaged ship become a liability, rammed it into a Kravith cruiser at full speed. Both ships exploded in a ball of fire visible from the planet below. The carrier Roosevelt lost her entire port flight deck but kept launching fighters anyway, her crew working in vacuum suits to manually load the launch tubes. Commander Rodriguez took a piece of shrapnel to his shoulder when a Kravith weapon punched through the Indomitable's armor. He refused medical attention until his shift ended 12 hours later. And through it all, while the main fleet fought and died to hold the swarm's attention, Captain Okonkwo and her 12 stealth corvettes slipped through the chaos like ghosts. On Valeros Prime, Ambassador Telris and her people watched the battle through their telescopes and sensors. They saw the small human fleet fighting desperately against impossible odds. They saw ships die, but they also saw something else. They saw the swarm, for the first time in its expansion across this sector, being forced backward. The humans were outgunned, outmassed, and outmatched. But they weren't outfought. They moved like a school of fish, coordinating without rigid formation. When one ship was damaged, others covered its retreat. When they found a weakness, they exploited it ruthlessly. The Velari military commander, General Kith, watched in amazement. "They fight like the ocean," he said. "Not like a wall that resists, but like water that flows around obstacles and finds every crack." On the third day of battle, Captain Okonkwo's voice came across the fleet's command channel. "Admiral, we're in position. Beginning our run now." Mensa gripped the arms of his command chair. Everything depended on the next few minutes. "Good luck, Captain. Make it count." Okonkov's Ghost and her 11 sister ships dove into the heart of the swarm, their stealth fields flickering as they approached the massive command vessels. The galaxy was about to learn that humans didn't just fight harder than expected, they fought smarter too. Captain Sarah Okonkwo had seen many terrible things in her military career, but nothing had prepared her for the interior of a Kravith command ship. The Ghost had slipped through a wound in the bioship's hull, a gap created by fire from the main fleet. Now Okonkwo and her 12-person strike team moved through corridors that weren't built but grown. The walls pulsed with life. The air was hot and smelled like rot and copper. "This is disgusting," muttered Sergeant Chen, his weapon scanning the darkness ahead. "It's like we're inside something's stomach." "Stay focused," Okonkwo whispered. They were deep in enemy territory. One mistake would kill them all. The team had trained for this mission on the journey to Velros. They carried a weapon designed by Earth's best artificial intelligence researchers, but it wasn't a bomb or a gun. It was information. A virus, but not the kind that destroyed computers or biology. This virus attacked minds. The Kravith were a hive mind, every individual connected to every other through quantum entanglement that humanity still didn't fully understand. But Earth's AI specialist had studied the intercepted Kravith communications. They found something interesting. The swarm had never encountered disagreement within itself. When every mind thought the same thoughts, conflict was impossible. The AI researchers had asked a simple question. What would happen if you introduced doubt into a consciousness that had never doubted anything? Okonkwo's team carried the answer in a quantum storage device smaller than her fist. They reached the central chamber, and even the hardened Marines paused. The room was enormous, more cathedral than ship interior. In the center floated a massive brain-like structure, easily 30 feet across. Tendrils of neural tissue connected it to the ship's walls. This was it. The command node. The thing that coordinated thousands of Kravith vessels. "Set up the uplink," Okonkwo ordered. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before they realize we're here." Specialist Rodriguez, no relation to the commander on the Indomitable, worked quickly to interface the quantum device with the Kravith's neural network. His hands shook slightly. He was 23 years old and had joined the military to pay for engineering school. Now he was hacking an alien hive mind in the middle of a war zone. "Connection established," he said. Uploading the virus now. Outside, in the space around Valros Prime, Admiral Mensa watched his tactical display with growing concern. The battle had reached a critical point. The Third Fleet had lost 9 ships completely and 17 more were badly damaged. The swarm was adapting to human tactics. Their bioships were growing new weapon types, new defenses. "Sir, the Beijing is reporting critical damage to her reactor," Rodriguez said from his station, his shoulder now properly bandaged. "They're requesting permission to evacuate crew." "Denied," Mensa said, hating himself for it. "If they abandon ship now, the swarm will overwhelm that section of the line. Tell them to hold." "Yes, sir." Mensa watched the Beijing on his screen. Her captain, a young woman named Park, acknowledged the order without complaint. Her ship continued, fighting even as fires raged through her corridors. Then something changed. The Kravith ships suddenly stopped their coordinated attack. They began moving erratically, some of them firing on each other. On the Indomitable's bridge, every officer stared at their screens in confusion. "What's happening?" Mensa demanded. "Unknown, sir. The swarm's communication patterns are going crazy. They're transmitting at 10 times normal volume and the signals are contradictory." Deep inside the command ship, Okonkwo felt the change. The pulsing walls around her began to spasm. The massive brain structure in the center of the chamber started flashing with bioluminescent patterns, faster and faster. "Time to go," she shouted. "Move! Move! Move!" Her team ran back through the organic corridors as the ship began to tear itself apart around them. Behind them, they could hear something that sounded impossibly like screaming. The virus was working. The concept was simple but devastating to a hive mind. The virus introduced questions. Are you sure? What if you're wrong? Why do you believe this? For humans, these thoughts were part of normal consciousness. For the Kravith, they were poison. The hive mind began to doubt its own decisions. Should they attack? Maybe they should retreat. But retreating might be wrong. Better to attack. But what if attacking was wrong? The questions multiplied, spreading through the quantum network like wildfire. Individual Kravith ships, having never had to think for themselves, panicked. Some fled. Some attacked whatever was closest, including their own kind. Some simply stopped moving, paralyzed by the new and terrible experience of uncertainty. The ghost burst out of the command ship seconds before it began to implode. Okonkwo watched through her view screen as the massive bioship collapsed in on itself, the victim of its own confused immune system. "Ghost to Indomitable," she called. "Package delivered. Suggest immediate full assault while they're confused." Mensa didn't hesitate. "All ships, full offensive. Target the disorganized vessels. Don't give them time to recover." The Third Fleet, battered and bleeding but still fighting, pressed their advantage. The Velari Defense Force, watching from their orbital stations, saw their moment and joined the attack. Their ships were small and lightly armed, but it didn't matter. The swarm was tearing itself apart. For 6 more hours the battle raged, but it was no longer an organized defense against an overwhelming force. It was chaos, and humans were very, very good at exploiting chaos. One by one, the Kravith ships either fled to hyperspace or were destroyed. The ones that fled were still fighting among themselves as they vanished. The ones that stayed stopped fighting back, their crews consumed by doubt and internal conflict. When the last Kravith vessel jumped away, a strange silence fell over the Velros system. On the bridge of the Indomitable, nobody moved for a long moment. They had won. Somehow, impossibly, they had won. Rodriguez broke the silence. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from Velros Prime." The screen shifted to show Ambassador Telris. She was crying, her bioluminescent skin glowing bright blue with emotion. Behind her, Okonkwo could see crowds of Velari filling the streets, looking up at the sky. "Admiral Mensa," Telris said, her voice breaking. "Thank you. Thank you." "How? Can we ever thank you?" Mensa was exhausted. He had been awake for 3 days straight, 14 ships destroyed, 3,000 personnel dead, but 3 billion Velari were alive. "You already did, Ambassador," he said quietly. "You asked for help." That's all you needed to do. Across the galaxy, on hundreds of worlds, beings watched the news feeds in shock. The humans had done the impossible. The newcomers, the primitives, the species barely 50 years out from their first contact, had defeated the Kravath swarm. In the Galactic Council chambers, High Counselor Vexthor watched the reports with growing unease. The humans had changed something fundamental. They had shown that the galaxy's calculations, its careful balance of cost and benefit, could be wrong. More importantly, they had shown that someone would answer when others called for help. That changed everything. 6 months after the Battle of Velros, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The topic of discussion was simple, but terrifying to the elder races. What do we do about humanity? High Counselor Vexthor stood at the center of the chamber, his crystalline form reflecting the worried faces around him. The gallery was packed with observers from hundreds of worlds. This wasn't a routine meeting. This was a reckoning. The human intervention in the Velros system has created unprecedented complications, Vexthor began. Since their victory, we have received over 200 formal requests for protection from minor species. All of them are asking for human assistance, not council protection. Counselor Jen of the Thranosians rippled with agitation. The humans are undermining thousands of years of carefully maintained order. They make decisions based on emotion rather than logic. They take risks that no rational species would accept, and yet they succeeded where we said success was impossible, came a voice from the gallery. Every head turned. Ambassador Telris stood in the observation area, no longer the desperate supplicant, but a voice of authority. She was flanked by representatives from a dozen other species, all of them from worlds the Council considered minor or strategically unimportant. Ambassador Telris, Vexthor said coldly. This is a closed session. You were not invited to speak. Then I will speak uninvited, Telris replied. She descended to the main floor, her fellow ambassadors following. You wish to discuss the human problem. We are that problem, because we refuse to accept that some lives matter less than others. Another ambassador stepped forward. He was Korin, from a desert world called Shendar. His people had been fighting off raiders for decades while the Council debated whether intervention was cost-effective. 3 months ago, humans responded to our distress call, Korin said. They sent 12 ships, not to conquer us, not to demand payment. They sent advisors to train our defense forces and engineers to help us build orbital defenses. They asked for nothing in return. More ambassadors came forward, each telling similar stories. The humans had responded to calls the Council ignored. They had sent aid when the elder races calculated it wasn't worthwhile. They had treated every species as equals, regardless of their technology level or strategic importance. Counselor Drex of the Xanthir Collective clicked his mandibles angrily. This is precisely the problem. The humans don't understand the complexity of maintaining galactic civilization. If we help every species that asks, the entire system collapses. Then maybe your system deserves to collapse, Telris said quietly. The chamber erupted. Some counselors shouted in outrage, others looked uncomfortable. The observers in the gallery began chanting, a sound that hadn't been heard in the council chambers in living memory. On Earth, Admiral Chen Mei-Lin watched the live feed from the council session. She sat in her office at UN Galactic Affairs Command, a cup of coffee growing cold on her desk. Beside her stood Secretary General Maria Santos. They're terrified of us, Santos observed. The elder races have spent millennia building a system where they control everything. We're threatening that. Good, Chen said simply. Their system lets billions suffer while they calculate profit margins. Her communicator chimed. It was Admiral Mensa, calling from the 3rd Fleet's current position near a trade hub called Nexus Station. Admiral Chen, we have a situation. The Luxari hegemony is threatening economic sanctions if we don't withdraw from the systems we're currently protecting. They're also proposing a council resolution to limit human military deployments. Chen smiled without humor. Let them try. We're not violating any laws, we're just helping people who ask for help. They're also claiming we're trying to build an empire, An empire? Chen laughed. We're literally giving away military technology and asking nothing in return. What kind of empire does that? On the capital world of the Luxari hegemony, a different conversation was taking place. Fleet Commander Zixtel stood before the hegemony's ruling council, presenting his analysis of human military capabilities. They're technologically inferior, in almost every way, Zixtel explained. Their weapons are less powerful, their shields are weaker, their ships are smaller. Then how did they defeat the Kravath swarm? Demanded one of the council members. They think differently, Zixtel admitted reluctantly. They don't follow standard tactical doctrine. They improvise. They take risks that would be considered unacceptable by our standards. And somehow it works. He brought up tactical recordings of the Battle of Velros. The council watched as human ships perform maneuvers that made the Luxari commanders uncomfortable just watching them. They also have something else, Zixtel continued. Motivation. Our forces fight because they're ordered to. The humans fight because they believe in what they're doing. Every human in that fleet was a volunteer. They chose to risk their lives for strangers. The council chamber fell silent. The Luxari had been the dominant military power in their sector for 3,000 years. They had never encountered an enemy they couldn't outspend or outlast. But the humans weren't enemies, and that made them far more dangerous. Back in the Galactic Council chambers, Ambassador Telris was finishing her speech. Her voice carried throughout the hall, transmitted to millions of worlds across the galaxy. You call humanity dangerous. You say they're disruptive, impulsive, emotional. You're right. But perhaps that's exactly what this galaxy needs. Because you've become so obsessed with maintaining order that you've forgotten what civilization is supposed to be for. She pointed at the gathered counselors. Civilization exists to protect the weak, to help those who cannot help themselves, to ensure that every life has value. Somewhere along the way, you forgot that. You started measuring success by profit and stability instead of by how many people live in peace and safety. Vexthor stood. And you think the humans are better than us? No, Telris said. I think they're younger. They still remember what it's like to suffer. They haven't had thousands of years to convince themselves that suffering is just the price of doing business. The vote came that evening. The council proposed Resolution 4477, which would severely limit human military operations outside their home system. It needed a 2/3 majority to pass. As the votes were counted, Telris held her breath. Then the result appeared on the massive display. The resolution failed. Not by much, but enough. The elder races had voted as a bloc in favor. But the smaller species, the ones the council had ignored for so long, voted against. And there were far more of them than anyone had realized. In the weeks that followed, a new alliance began to form. The Velari called it the Compact of Free Worlds. Humanity didn't lead it. They refused to take that role. But they were its heart and its inspiration. The Compact's charter was simple. Any member world that called for help would receive it. No cost-benefit analysis, no strategic calculations, just beings helping other beings because it was right. The elder races watched nervously as the Compact grew. They tried economic pressure. They tried political isolation. But they couldn't fight an idea, and the idea was spreading. Admiral Chen, now promoted to Fleet Admiral and given command of all human military forces, met with Ambassador Telris on Velros Prime 1 year after the battle. They stood on a cliff overlooking the ocean, watching the twin moons rise. Do you think we can sustain this? Telris asked. The Compact, I mean. The elder races have resources we can't match. Maybe, Chen said, but they have a weakness we don't have. What's that? They've forgotten how to care more about doing what's right than about doing what's safe. We haven't. And as long as we remember that, we'll win. Far above them, in orbit, the Third Fleet maintained its vigil. New ships were joining all that came. Time, not just from Earth but from Velros, from Shendar, from a dozen other worlds that had found hope in humanity's example. The galaxy was changing, slowly, painfully, but changing. Because one species had heard a cry for help and decided that "Not our problem," wasn't an acceptable answer. On Earth, Lieutenant Commander Jessica Torres, the woman who had sent the first message about the Velari crisis, watched the news feeds from her posting at the Council embassy. She thought about how far they'd come in just 1 year. The galaxy had called humanity primitive and emotional. They said humans didn't understand how things worked. They were right. Humans didn't understand how you could hear someone screaming for help and choose to do nothing, and they never would.